All right, thank you for joining us for Hack Proof Your Holidays. This is our last webinar of the Get Savvy Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series for this calendar year, but we are picking things back up in January to continue the academic year series. So hopefully you also are registered for future webinars. My name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system out of University Bursar, and I am joined today by my colleague from UIC College of Business, Steve Bobb. So Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you. I run a program called the Entrepreneurial Support Program, and my main task is to help entrepreneurs. But Andrea and I have been working together on various workshops over the years, and it's always fun to help out. And today's topic is a relevant topic.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Steve has a lot of really great experience with all kinds of topics. So I'm glad that we're able to work together on so many personal finance and business finance related webinar topics. Collectively, the Get Savvy webinar team represents organizations across the state of Illinois, which rests on the ancestral lands of multiple Native nations, including the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and work with them towards a more vibrant and inclusive society. So, like I said earlier, we really like to use polls. So I have a poll on demographics that I am going to launch real quick. This gives both Steve and I, as well as some of our collaborators on the Get Savvy webinar series, a little bit of information on who's joining us regularly, who's joining us today, what kinds of backgrounds you're coming from. So, for example, are you a student? Are you employed? Maybe you're a part-time employee, or maybe you are a parent of a student, a partner of a student. That helps us kind of change how we talk about different things. We also like to know which university you're affiliated with so that we can report to our collaborators who are marketing these programs across their universities, or in my case, across all the universities, who is joining us. And that also is very helpful. So thanks to those of you that you have responded. I'll leave it up for a couple more seconds, but it looks like we have a younger age group today that's joining us, and mostly students from Urbana, and that's great. So I'm going to close the poll so we can keep things rolling. We have a lot to cover because hacking proof the holidays is kind of challenging. So hopefully by the end of today's webinar, you will be able to define some terminology related to identity theft, fraud, and scams, and kind of recognize the role that the holidays play in increasing scam, targeting consumers and businesses, really. We also want you to be able to understand how scammers exploit this kind of giving season. People are very generous during the holidays. They want to give to others, they want to support others, both family, friends, and community members. Hopefully, you'll be able to implement a few data protection best practices from what we talk about today. There's always opportunities to do more, but hopefully we'll give you some high level tips that will help you create some good identity protection practices. And then if you do become a victim, we want you to know where to go to get resources and navigate kind of limiting any potential damages to that. So we're going to launch another poll, and my polls went away, but I'll open them up again. What do you think? What is your bigger holiday concern this season? Is it overspending or online security? Or maybe it's something else. Maybe you're more worried about your family or friends falling on ice, right? That's a concern of mine right now with the weather. Right. So most people are concerned about overspending. We're going to talk a little bit about overspending We're going to focus more on identity theft protection and how to be aware of scams, but we have a few things on overspending. So I'll end the poll and we'll share the results real quick and we'll go ahead and stop the poll. So younger people fall victim more often, or at least report falling victim more often to fraud or scams or identity theft issues compared to older people. However, older adults lose more money when they do get scammed on average. So this tells us that everyone is vulnerable regardless of how old they are. And unfortunately, the sad reality is that many cases of fraud go unreported because of the shame that people feel around being a victim. Unfortunately, a lot of people feel guilt when they've become a victim of fraud, but there's a lot of things working against us in identifying what is a scam or where fraud may be occurring. In the spirit of giving and thinking about our families and our friends and their potential risks, we want you to think about the content that we cover today, not just in terms of your own risks, but also the risks that your extended family are in, or your friends, or even your parents or siblings or other loved ones. Since you're going to be coming up to a holiday time frame where you might be spending more time with the people that you care about, how can you share what may help protect your loved ones over the holidays that you've learned throughout this webinar? So think about that as we are discussing today's content. And I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk about the holiday threat landscape.
Thank you, Andrea. So why are holidays riskier? So next slide, please. So here are four factors that have an impact that we think are important and influence why holidays are high risk. One, let's be honest, we're all living in time pressure, especially as we approach the end of the semester, as we approach the holiday season. There are issues about, do we get things done? We got to think about those gifts. We got to think about what we need to do to be prepared. Um, we tend to have different schedules, probably different responsibilities, seeing different people, being with family, so we're distracted. Um, Many times we're trying to be generous. We're trying to think about how to help people who maybe don't have as much as us, so we're trying to be generous. And then there are just more financial transactions going on at this time, which means, of course, that there's more opportunities for fraud to happen. Um, so next slide, please. So I think a lot of us probably use the term scam, fraud, and identity theft as very interchangeable. There are some differences, some definitions that others have used, so I think it's worth kind of thinking about those just a little bit. So, scam is typically a deceptive scheme to trick you. An example of that would be a fake charity or something that might sound too good to be true. Um, a fraud typically is a situation where there's an illegal deception for financial gain, often using stolen or falsified information. So some examples are stolen credit card numbers, a fake insurance claim, things that are often initiated by somebody else with information that belongs to you. And then identity theft is also often called out as separate. These other scams and frauds can be part of that, but often identity theft is specifically around someone who has access or gets access to your personal information and using that to commit fraud or other crimes. And the government continues to collect some information about identity theft. And in 2025, they reported that identity theft was the highest reported type of fraud in the state of Illinois. Um, So, uh, thank you for switching the slide there. Two things about identity theft just to be aware of is identity theft does happen within families, and it's always sad that somebody you love and have been very close to might use your identity in an improper way. But we do need to be aware that that does happen. And specifically, if identity theft has happened to you and it's related to family, you do need to do some research and understand. We're putting some documents in the chat so you'll have access to them, because there are some nuances relating to age, especially if someone's is under age 18. So it's important to decide how you're going to address this issue because um, it can affect you for a long time. Um, and so you want to address it as soon as possible. We have some separate resources on identity theft that Andrea will share later on. And so if you want to get more information on that, please let us know and we'll be glad to point you to those resources. Next slide, please. So what are some tactics that scammers use? How are they taking advantage, especially of this season? Um, and these actually are not only this season, but I think we're more sensitive during this season. So urgency, the whole idea is you got to do this right now. If you wait, the opportunity will pass. There's only so many. So make a quick decision. Emotion, oftentimes trying to get us to uh, again, make quick decisions, but based on the emotional side of the decision. So fake charity scams often take advantage of this, of saying there's a need, let's address it as fast as possible. Um, and romance scams, and we're going to talk a little bit about those later on, tend to be more intense during the holiday season. But like many of these things, these all can be effective the rest of the year as well. Authority, certainly as we're thinking about gifts and as our world has become more online and there's more stuff shipped, the fake shipping notices, package stuck in customs, see those a lot. And then year-end tax scams can come into this, so things related to government agencies. And then social proof scams, whether it's fake reviews, AI-generated cust testimonials, things that are not really real that we are trying to rely on. And we'll talk a little bit about some website things as we go through the process. Thank you. Next slide. So, a specific example here would be gift giving or gift season guilt trip. Um, the scammer uses the emotional and urgency tactics to get you to pay attention to them and hopefully not, but they want you to take advantage of them. Sometimes copycat charity names are happening at this time where they use a name that's slightly different, or we'll see some more about how they can do this, and we just need to be careful. And unfortunately, there are fake GoFundMe campaigns and things of this nature that it's hard to find evidence that it's real, so we should be checking for that. Again, there's that red flag that we want to do it right away. Often, scams want people to pay with methodologies that are not so common. Gift cards are very hard to trace. Wire transfers happen so quickly that it's often hard to recover from a wire transfer, or crypto, where the coding again makes it harder to trace. Um, Always, I would suggest that even as part of the verify thing, check social media, especially if there's no records, that would be something. And if they're saying that this is something that it's just not clear exactly what the money's going to be used for, again, that can be a red flag. Fortunately, there are some services that we can use to verify nonprofit organizations. The IRS has a search tool, Charity Navigator is another one, and Better Business Bureau has give.org. These are just different sources that you might want to check out, especially if you've never heard of the organization before. You can do reverse image searches. Fortunately, the internet has made that relatively easy. And again, be very cautious if they're talking about gift cards or wire transfers. There are places to use those appropriately, but in general, you need to be really sensitive when that happens. Next slide. Another thing that, of course, is happening all the time, but again, is a little more concerning during the holiday seasons is around employment scams. And Some red flags we want to think about, if something is mainly done communication through text and emails. Again, those could be legitimate, but we need to be really careful. It is very easy, and I've especially run into older folks who don't believe that, or who are very trusting and who don't realize that both text and emails can be fake. The sources of those can be done if someone really wants to. Um, the idea of paying before you work is would be a red flag. Vague job descriptions, especially larger companies, they're going to be clear on what they're looking for, and so if it's vague, you need to really make sure that you understand. And then another red flag is the no interview process, and uh, that doesn't mean that it isn't a scam, but it's certainly something to be very careful. One of the things to be especially concerned about is the data that you're sharing can be ending up in the wrong hands. And we know that in order to get paid and to verify that we're eligible to work in the country, we need to provide a lot of personal information. And so we want to make sure that we know that the people that are collecting that information are people we can trust and who are legitimate. Next slide, please. Another thing to think about around the holidays, and this has always been fascinating to me, is the value of credentials and information on the dark web. And so often I've run into a lot of people and always thought myself until I started working with Andrea on this, oh, I've got to protect my social security number. And I still encourage you to protect your social security number. But actually, on the dark web, social security numbers are worth less than full access to an email account. And for many people, we put so much stuff in our email that people want, if they could get full access to an email and password, that is worth a lot more than just a social security number. You can see that there are some other things that are very valuable. Medical fraud does happen, so having access to your medical records is something you want to protect, as well as your bank accounts, and of course, social security and, or I mean, credit cards and crypto accounts. You want to protect those. So moving on. So another thing to be cautious about is oversharing on social media. And so a significant concern to be aware of is photographs. And maybe you're aware of this, maybe you aren't. But when you take a picture, if you haven't, in most cases, if you have not intentionally turned off the geotag or geolocation information in your photograph app, those photos do have that information in there. And there have been lots of cases of criminals who have been able to access that information. And so if you're taking pictures and you're either not at your house or you're away from town while you're on break, and you're taking pictures and people can see from looking at your photos that you are not where you normally are, your home, your apartment could be at risk. And so I would encourage you to take some time. Actually, when Andrea and I were looking over this slide yesterday, getting ready for today, one of the things I did was I did check is on my phone when I take pictures, is the geo information added or not? And I would encourage you to decide. And I would also encourage you to adjust your privacy settings to friends only. Um, Not that that is the most effective. I think that taking the geotags out is really important as well. So go ahead. We've got another poll here.
Thank you, Steve. I am launching the poll. So we just kind of want to understand, how have you heard of artificial intelligence or generative AI being used for scams? It's kind of everywhere in the news right now, its capabilities, right? But how have you seen it applied or have heard of it being applied? So a lot of you are saying imposter scams, online reviews, investment scams, deep fakes. Um, there's a whole bunch of options out there. And maybe there's something that you've seen in the news or you've experienced yourself that isn't in the list we put in this poll. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results real quick. You can see that everyone's seen online reviews being used or AI scams being used for online reviews or fake reviews. A lot of investment scams and imposter scams and deep fakes. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. So, um, these are all things that happen. There are a lot of ways that generative AI expands scam opportunities and makes it more difficult for us to identify scams. And it's completely changed the whole scam landscape in a lot of ways. So for example, deep fakes, these are completely fabricated videos. Those have been around for a while, but generative AI makes them easier to create and harder for us to identify as fake because they are such high quality and they are trained on so much video data that it makes it easier for people to very quickly create deep fakes that could fool other people. Voice training or cloning is often used. It only takes 30 seconds of audio for someone to train an AI to sound like you or to sound like your sister or brother or your mom or dad. So you can't really trust that a voice on the phone is who they say they are, or a voice over a phone call at work is actually who they say they are. So that's something to keep in mind. Language processors or large language models as a new generative AI technology makes it so it's a lot harder to use the look for grammatical errors or misspelling in written content to identify a scam because you can no longer look for grammatical errors or typos in phishing emails because AI can write perfect, personalized, grammatically flawless phishing emails in seconds in any language. So we just have to be a lot more careful, but we also need different ways to approach identifying scams, right? So all of these examples that we're talking about make us make it easy to see why establishing a safe word with your family might be a good tool to use. So when you set up a safe word with your family, you want to make it unique. You want to keep it private. You want to use different words for different groups. So if you have a work safe word that you use with your colleagues, don't use the same one for your family. You want different ones. And you may want to practice using it so it becomes a habit with all of your family members. And if you do have to share it electronically rather than in person, you'll want to use encrypted messaging apps or encrypted sharing tools, which may require teaching your family members what that is and how to use them. So if you are thinking about an activity to do with your family when you go home for the holidays, before everyone leaves the holiday gathering, you might want to establish a family safe word. You might want to make it a tradition, like checking smoke detector batteries, but this is just for identity protection, right, within your family. If someone calls claiming to be in trouble, ask them a question that only they would know, like, what's your family code word? It kind of sounds a little bit dramatic, but it could help prevent your parent or grandparent or your cousin from being scammed out of their life savings, which you want to help them with. So there's some more information on staysafeonline.org about safe words. So you can check into that if that's something that you want to advocate for within your family. So we haven't talked as much about security or data breaches today, but malware is one way that a security breach could occur. The term came from combining the word malicious and the word software in the 90s. And Google Dictionary defines it as software that is specifically designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to a computer system. So once we know what malware is, it's easy to see how ransomware is defined. So this is a specific type of malware that infects a computer system, usually targeting a large organization like a business, a hospital, a government agency, a school, and encrypts the files on that device or network so that they become unusable. And then a ransom demand is made in exchange for decrypting the data that's on those devices. Unfortunately, there's no guarantee that paying the ransom will get the data back, as a lot of ransomware programs will have already corrupted the data. However, there are multiple entities, including government agencies, that are set up to try to protect consumers and organizations from ransomware, but you also need to be aware that that is a possibility. One security vulnerability that we wanted to talk about that's not explicitly related to ransomware, but is in the tech-oriented spectrum of data security was the MOVEit security vulnerability. It was a globally significant vulnerability, and the impacts continued over a period of many months, I think into 2024. It wasn't just in 2023. We're focusing on it here since it has relevance in Illinois, but it has very far-reaching impacts because of the scope and variety of organizations that use the MOVEit software. So if you're interested in learning more about how this particular security vulnerability impacted industries both within Illinois, across the United States, and I think even globally, we're putting some of the links in the chat that you can check that out. But I am going to hand it over to Steve at this point.
Years ago, a couple of years ago in 2023, I heard this quote, and I think it's really relevant to think about. You're not too small to get hacked. You're too small to make the news. And as the online challenges have grown, we're only hearing about the biggest ones. The Move It one was a very large one. There's actually one that I heard about last night on the news in the Chicagoland area. There's a school district outside of Chicago that's been shut down for a couple of days. They haven't yet announced that it's a ransomware attack, but I'm pretty sure that it is, given what they've said about it. So it does happen, and it does occasionally still impact individuals. It's not as common because they're going after bigger organizations trying to be able to demand higher ransom payments, but it's still something that happens to individuals and is worth being aware of. So what are some resources to help you see and to be aware that if you need to protect yourself? So the website Have I Been Pwned is worth you checking out, and you can enter an email address and see if that email address has been found in any of the breaches that they have accumulated. They've also added a new feature where you can actually type in a password and they will see if that password has been found in the breach. Now, I know sometimes people are a little nervous about putting their passwords in, and you'll have to decide if you think that you can trust them for that. But this website has been around for a long time, and certainly I have certainly used it for the email account, and I think that it's something to be aware of and use because um, I think probably now most of us have been compromised in some way, but this just gives you extra evidence that it is, and um, aware of helping somebody who might think that, oh, it's never happened to me. Well, here's an easy way to check and find resources to help you as you're thinking about this. You can also set up an account with them so that they will send you an email if anything's ever been found in a new breach, and they're getting information at different times. So if you check today, that doesn't mean that in a week they won't find another breach that has information. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about shopping and giving scams. Moving on. So I think we have another poll here, correct, Andrea?
Yes, I just launched it. So there's a whole lot of options for what you might see or what you might look for as scam indicators. But there's also a short answer poll option for if there's something not on our list that we missed. And you might have to press submit after you make your selections, just so we can see who is participating. Steve, are they coming through for you? Can you see them?
I'm seeing a few.
Okay.
So, so let's go on to the next slide because I think that those reflect a lot of what we're in our poll here. So here are six red flags. Certainly, these aren't the only red flags, but these are some really good ones. If it sounds too good to be true, and I have an elderly mother who, of course, I love her very much, but she'll occasionally call me up, and I'll just be like, "It just sounds a little too good to be true. Let's step back here." Another red flag is threats or intimidation. Um, Unfortunately, especially around IRS and other government things of saying, if you don't pay right away, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. Um, Government websites or government agencies that are legitimate are not going to be threatening or intimidating, especially on the first or second communication. Um, so being asked for personal information, you should always be questioning when someone says, why do they need your social security number? Or why do they need your address? Certainly for some services, it's very legitimate, but for others, maybe they don't need it. Um, so, requiring unusual payment methods. We gift cards and wire transfers are often used by scammers because they're much harder to deal with. Um, Being aware of misspellings, whether that be in the username or an email address or a website address, a URL, we should always be aware of those. I've gotten some emails reportedly from, various companies that I've done business with that I'm like, this doesn't seem right. There's something about it. I'll dig into it. We used to worry about the grammar, like Andrew said earlier. We can't worry about that so much anymore, but certainly are everything spelled properly? And then are they communicating in a methodology that's not normal? Um, a phone call or a text are things that you should be aware of that maybe are not as common for specific types of communication. And so, again, be careful about those red flags. Next slide. I think Andrea,
Think
you're
I
going to
get a take.
go.
Think I get to take over. Thank you. So when Steve was talking about the misspellings, one, it's easy for us to kind of glaze over misspellings of URLs or misspellings of email addresses sometimes. Even while we were prepping this morning for today's link sheet that Sahil has been double checking all the links for us on, we realized that there was one missing letter in one of the URLs, so it wasn't working, right? It's easy for us to miss that when we're skimming. But it's even harder if you know about homographs or homoglyphs. So, for example, or if you don't know about them. So, homograph or homoglyph attacks use characters from different alphabets that look identical to whatever your language that you are navigating the world with, to create fake domains. So, for example, I have apple.com, two different versions of apple.com on the screen right now. Can you put in the chat which one is the homograph? Is it the one on the top, one, or is it two? I think probably everyone can't tell because the two, the second apple.com uses a Cyrillic A, not a Latin A, but you can't tell that visually. So in order to identify these kinds of homoglyphs or homographs, I think they're sometimes called Unicode character lookalikes. You might have to use a tool. There are a few ways that you can kind of protect yourself from homograph attacks. So never click an email link. You want to type the URLs manually. You want to bookmark your legitimate websites, like for example, your banking website or even your school login website, any accounts that you might have. You want to check the actual URL. So you might copy and paste the URL into a text editor to see what the real characters are. Or you might use a password manager that won't autofill on a fake domain. So unless it is programmed for a domain that has a Cyrillic letter instead of a Latin letter, it's not going to autofill. And if you have browsers that you can either install plugins that identify homographs or homoglyphs, or you can use your native browser to enable homograph protection in your browser when you're navigating the internet. That can help you avoid, phishing attempts through a malicious URL that is hard to identify as a malicious URL without taking some of these extra steps. All right, so we want to just kind of remind you of keeping ways to keep your information safe, not just online, but in real life as well. So you want to keep important papers secure. You might want to make sure that you have a lockable cabinet for your very important documents. You want to be careful with your mail. There's a lot of sensitive documentation that is physically mailed to you. And so mail theft is something that you might want to keep in mind. It does happen. You want to shred any sensitive documents. So if you don't currently have a shredder, getting a micro shredder or a cross-cut shredder to shred sensitive documents or things like pre-approval credit card offers so someone else can't get a hold of it and fill it out in your name would be very good. You want to avoid oversharing on social media, like we talked about earlier with geotagging. But in general, you don't need geotags if you're saying, I'm in Florida, when people know that you live in Illinois, for example. You want to lock your devices and make sure to read privacy policies so you keep them in mind. At least skim them. I know a lot of them are really long. The other thing that you can do is physically limit how much you carry so that if your bag gets lost or your wallet gets lost, you aren't losing your social security card and your driver's license and all of your credit cards. Only carry what you need. Um, we talked about medical identity theft being a big thing when we were talking about the value of your data on the dark web. So destroying your prescription labels after you're done with the prescription bottle is a good idea. You can also opt out of pre-approved credit card offers to avoid someone getting a hold of one of those pre-approved offers and filling out your information. And then you also obviously want to be careful about using public Wi-Fi. Use a VPN if you can. The university, if you are a student, has VPNs that you can use. So just keep that in mind. All right. So in talking about passwords, Steve is going to take over.
Cool. So it's super important that you don't share your passwords or PINs, and both with other people you know, but also on the different websites that you're having access to. One of the things that's been very common and has been a real big issue is that people use the same password on a bunch of websites. And if one of those websites is your bank, and then let's say that you had your favorite pizza delivery company had your password and they got hacked. Um, One of the things is because people do this so often, criminals are very quick to take the list that they got from the pizza company, and now they're going to run those usernames and passwords through financial institutions. and see if any hits happen. Again, it's happened enough that they see it's worth doing. And so, yes, we live in a world where we have to figure out how we use different passwords. And so a password manager is something that most security experts recommend. There are a number of choices out there. There are free ones that are really good, I think, and there are some, of course, that you can pay for. The university doesn't recommend any, but you can do some research and you can find one. And don't share the answers to your security questions. Uh, Again, sometimes people will use like the name to their dog for their security questions, and then they'll put a picture on social media. Here's my puppy named such and such. And then someone figures out, oh, we might try that for one of their security questions. Next slide, please. So here are some hints about passwords. In general, most experts suggest that longer passwords are better. Another way of doing passwords is called passphrases. And so typically different people recommend different things, but at least 12 characters, sometimes a little bit longer. One of the things about using passphrases is that typically most passphrases are three or more words, and so that helps you get longer passwords. Recently, I haven't found any websites that I use where there's a limit, or at least not a reasonable limit. But you definitely, if they're saying only 8 characters, that's probably not enough. You probably want to use 12 or more characters, and then you should mix. There's in the password world, they talk about 4 types. So on the bottom here, we've got lowercase and uppercase. That's 2. Numbers are the third, and then special characters are the fourth. So in an ideal situation, you're going to mix upper, lower, and special characters as well as numbers. And so there's a good sample of mixing those different types. I've also noticed one last comment on that, that some sites define special characters in a very special way. So sometimes, like my password manager will pick a special character, and I've had a couple websites that say you don't have a special character. So sometimes you have to look at what the fine print is on those. But it's pretty easy when you're using words that come together. Multi-factor authentication is also a good thing. Multi-factor authentication is a process where once you log in, then a notification is sent to you, typically through a text, but there can be different ways it's done this, and then you have to enter that second set of information. Probably, at least at UIC, we have Duo. I don't know what downstate the other schools are using, but so
All the
occasionally,
schools use Duo.
okay.
Sorry.
So you're probably familiar with using that. You get a notification. There is some recommendation out there that there can be some risk with that. So do be careful, but that is good. Next slide, please. So password sharing problems. So a lot of times people want to share passwords for different reasons. Maybe you want to share a Netflix account with somebody that's important in your life. Um, but it's important that you understand the risks and be careful about that. Um, One is the more you're sharing those passwords, and if you're using that same password in other places, you're just exposing yourself to more risk. If it's an ex-partner and you break up, and they still have access, they could do things that, they could shut your account down, or they could post things if it was a social media account that were not things you wanted posted. So there are just different things. And then incapacitation, if someone gets hurt or something, then do they not have access to it? Fortunately, most password sharing programs have abilities to deal with issues like that. So, a number of password sharing programs allow you to share access to certain passwords, but not to actually give the person that password. So, especially I've seen this working with small businesses who are using virtual assistants, where they don't want to give the password to, say, their QuickBook account, but they want to let their virtual assistant access their QuickBooks. So they have specific situations in some of the password managers where you can delegate things. There's also the ability to do emergency access delegation, which again is avoiding password sharing, or sometimes you can have separate credentials. So you really want to be sensitive about that and understand what the risks are. Next slide. So yes, password managers really, um, if you're not using one, if your family aren't using them, you should really talk to them about it. They're really useful. Um, yes, it is one password, and you want to make sure that that is an extra secure password. Um, but the the flip side is that many people before password managers were common were writing all their passwords down. So they had a list that if someone compromised that list, it was very risky. So they can auto generate unique passwords. So again, not sharing the same password between your bank account and your pizza delivery company and everything else. So you can have different ones. They store things securely. Some of the password managers even can store other information for you. So like as a parent, I sometimes need my kids' social security numbers. So it gives me a safe place to store that and not have to worry about that. Most good password managers have their own apps and browser plugins. So, I can go to a website that uses my password manager and I don't even have to remember any of the information. I just go and it fills in. Um, so it's really worth looking at different password managers. And um, I've I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who once they started using a password manager was disappointed with how much it simplified things for them. Next screen. Um, do be aware of what are called MFA bombings or fatigue attacks. So if you're using an app authenticator app or something like Duo, what has happened, I know this was an issue at UIC, was that there was a compromise and it was determined later, they talked to the person who somebody had just gotten so many MFA requests that they finally just approved it because they were tired of getting the attacks. If you get multi-factor authentication notifications and you don't remember letting someone in, that's a sign that you need to be careful that maybe your password's been compromised. And I know that if you're using school or university accounts, the security teams will be more than happy to work with you on those because they don't want you to be the one who lets someone into the system that shouldn't be there. Next slide. Um, so best practices here, some things just to be thinking about. Um, be familiar with HTTPS and the padlock. Most web browsers now will show you if it's a secure site, especially if you're going to log in or create credentials. Uh, think about using encrypted messaging apps. Um, as you're thinking about traveling, using VPNs are definitely something, especially as you're thinking about holiday travel, you want to be careful about free internet access in places like airports, cafes, and others. You don't know who's really controlling that. I know from my experience, when you go to a place that says free Wi-Fi, often you're not really sure, is this the right one? Is this the one that's actually hosted? And someone could say outside of a business, they could be sitting in their car with some powerful equipment and be monitoring what's going on through that free VPN, free Wi-Fi. So using a VPN gives you more protection. Definitely talked about password managers. Set up multi-factor authentication on all your accounts, especially your financial accounts. Um, Honestly, if a bank or an investment service didn't offer MFA, I would think that you would want to reconsider if there are other options for you. Authenticator apps can really help. I know, like, I personally use Yahoo and I have my Duo authenticator app that the university gave me, gives me my codes for Yahoo. So they're totally unrelated, but I was able to get that set up. It wasn't hard. And it's nice to know that that's one more level of protection. With the multi-factor authentication, the best practices is really the number situation. So you get a text or an email that says, here's a code, and you have to enter that. Passkeys are much stronger than passwords. It's been a little bit of getting used to them and a slightly different process. But when you enter your username on sites that have passkeys, if you set it up, then you will get notified that you need to enter your passkey. And at least for me, with my password manager, it just pops up and I click that that's what I want, it goes on. And last of all, here on this slide, verify before you trust. Again, if you get a notification, question who it's from. Don't follow the links in emails or texts. Type those links in yourself. Yes, that takes a little bit longer, but it's a guarantee that you aren't going to get trapped in some kind of a situation where someone's doing something that you don't want. Next slide. Um, so again, be careful about public Wi-Fi, especially for financial transactions. I know it's really convenient to access that public Wi-Fi, but you don't know who's there. Be careful about who you share your email account with. I would suggest that for less important things, you probably want to set up another email account. Um, Gmail lets you set up, or other services are pretty easy to set up an email account. So for things in your life that aren't as important, aren't financial related, use an email that you're not going to be sharing the same email as your financial transactions. If you get security warnings, always figure out what those are about. Um, Ask questions, talk to other people who might know about them. But if there's a security warning, you should be careful, especially like if there's security errors, if your browser tells you that it's an unsafe website, you really want to understand why that is and what you can do. And remember that if someone says you have to do something immediately, you need to be careful. It's probably a scam, but you should check into it, but don't immediately respond the way they want you to. Respond with caution and trying to check out, is this authentic? Next. I think Andrew's going to do this.
Thank you, Steve. With the urgency piece that Steve just mentioned, this is also used with ads, so keep that in mind. But I think that it's important that we talk about romance scams, which in my opinion are really the saddest category of scams because it involves such intimate manipulation of someone's emotions, not just a loss of financial resources. So during the holidays, people might be more vulnerable since loneliness peaks around the winter months. People usually seek relationships and connection during fall and winter so that they have companionship during family gatherings, for example. And some of the common tactics that are used in romance scams include fake dating profiles with stolen photos, this is commonly referred to as catfishing. They may want to move the conversation off of that dating platform or messaging platform quickly. So let's text instead, or let's go to WhatsApp instead. Usually there's an effort to build emotional connection very fast and then create some emergency needing money. And they typically can't meet in person. Maybe they're military and they're overseas. Maybe they have a sick relative. Maybe there's some work crisis. There's usually lots of excuses. So when it comes to identifying romance scams, some common red flags are they profess love unusually fast, and they might say that you're their soulmate within days or weeks of starting the messaging conversation. They typically ask for money for some type of emergency, like even travel to visit you or some really big investment opportunity that they want for you. They might want gift cards or wire transfer or cryptocurrency, and maybe their photos look maybe a little bit too professional. This is where reverse image search is really helpful for identifying if they are stolen photos. And some other ways to encourage protecting yourself both emotionally and financially when it comes to romance scams or catfishing in general is try video chatting before trusting. Again, generative AI makes this kind of challenging because you can generate AI video relatively quickly. So someone could kind of pretend to be on video chat and it might be difficult, but it's one method of protection that you can try to use because a lot of scammers are going to refuse or make excuses on the video chatting. Never send money to someone you haven't met in person. It's ideal. And if their story that they tell you about who they are sounds a little vague, you might want to Google it because romance scams tend to recycle scripts. This is very common. So that is just one thing that we want to keep in mind with romance scams is that they hurt your heart, not just your wallet. So I said that we would have a little bit on overspending, and so we want to talk about how algorithms work to engineer you to overspend, not just they're used for scamming, right? So your browsing can be tracked. It's typically tracked by marketers. Your purchase history is tracked. All that data, especially online, is tracked. Your social media behavior can be pretty easy to access. And then all this data is fed into AI, which makes predictions and produces personalized ads online at a moment of weakness. So the way that they target you is they use retargeting, scarcity, social proof, time pressure, and dynamic pricing to urge you into making a purchasing decision. So some ways that you can protect against this is to use ad blockers, clear your cookies regularly, use private browsing tabs for price comparison, and wait 24 hours before making purchases. And there's some other tools and tips that we put in the chat. I know we came up to the 1 p.m. hour. We are recording this, so you can hop off if you need to, but we just have a couple more slides to get through if you want to hang on and listen to the rest of this. So, when you're thinking about watching out for friends and family before the gathering occurs, you might want to identify vulnerable family members, like maybe your grandparents or elderly aunts and uncles, maybe people that are a little more tech inexperienced, but also younger adults that just may not be aware of the risks that are out there. You want to prepare talking points. You don't want to lecture them. You want to share this as a gift of protection in honor of the holidays, right? You might also offer hands-on help. So let me help you set up that password manager, Grandma, so we can put it on all of your devices. When you are together during the holidays, you want to try to share the information you prepared naturally in conversation so that it doesn't sound lectury. You also might want to help your relatives enable multi-factor authentication. You might want to review social media privacy settings together. I had a situation where my mom's social media information was scraped and used to convince her in email that I was trying to share photos with her. But they had just scraped all of her friends list to generate a phishing email from her social media data. So reviewing parents' social media privacy settings together can be very helpful for avoiding that kind of situation. And then obviously set up spam filtering. We have a checklist that you can use if you want to. And creating a family code word is something that you might want to consider for that checklist. It's pretty important. So if you want to break it down to 3 tools to teach your family, you want them to stop, think, and verify. So when they stop, we don't want to rush decisions if you feel pressure, since that's a common red flag. You want to think about, does this make sense or is this too good to be true? And you want to verify outside of whatever the information is that you're being given. So look up the contact info for whoever's contacting you independently. Call official numbers, not what's provided in an email or an advertisement, and waiting to see what happens. You can also continue learning about all kinds of identity theft, scam prevention, and what to do if you become a victim through some of the tools that we're sharing. And Steve's going to wrap us up with what to do when things go wrong.
Thank you. So, next slide, please. So here are a couple things to think about. Um, it is very important to check your credit report. And after COVID, the three main credit bureaus allow you to get a copy of your report every week. So I don't think you want to do it every week, but maybe every month or every quarter, check your different reports. The three bureaus do have different information. They have similar information, but you do need to check all three. If all of a sudden you're missing bills, if you know that something seems weird about your mail delivery, you should be careful about that. Um, Notifications from the IRS are always something to be cautious about. The IRS tends to only send out stuff through the Postal Service. So if you get something about the IRS that's not through the Postal Service, it's probably something to check into. And if you do get a notice from the IRS, that could also be a sign of identity theft. I know years ago I had a situation where someone had misreported some information about some payroll in my household that was a scam, but it took us a while, and certainly we had moments of wondering what was going on. Um, if you get calls or mail in minor children's names, that should be something to be concerned about. Um, Calls from debt collectors about debts that you don't have, another sign that you could be a victim. And continue to check your financial institutions. If there's unusual activity there, you really want to be careful about that. Next, please. So I know the print is here a little bit hard. There's some links in the chat that will help you with this, but some things to think about immediately. Um, Contact financial institutions if you have any questions about your financial records to make sure that they're right. Um, if you feel that something's been compromised, one of the first things you want to do is change those passwords. Um, you know, Most people don't say to change your passwords a lot, but if you have a fear that you've been compromised, changing passwords is one really good thing, and make sure that you're using long and strong passwords. Uh, in terms of reporting, the FTC has good resources, and we put that in there. Certainly, the FBI and the police could be something you need to report. If it is a financial loss, you probably will need to report it to the police if you expect to get any money back. And it's not a guarantee that you will, but if you don't, you probably won't have that chance. You can create an identity theft report on the FTC's website. Um, Keep records of everything that you're reporting. If you get an email, if you get one email and you think it's a scam, probably don't need to do anything about it. But if you get a whole bunch or you feel you've been a victim, then you do want to record, keep copies of them, make sure that you have records. In many cases in life, record keeping helps you prove things. And sometimes in these situations, especially around that urgency, they're trying to get you to move quickly without keeping documents. And then it's harder to keep records and harder to prove that it was fraud. Um, Continue to monitor your credit reports. You can consider a credit freeze or a credit or a fraud report on your credit report. I know that there are some resources that we have about that. Look that up and make sure that you update your security questions every once in a while. Most reputable websites are going to make that not too difficult to do. So, just some wrap up. Behaviors: limit sharing, lock it up, use strong passwords, or better yet, passkeys if you can. Unfortunately, we've got to be skeptical. Shred documents that have sensitive information. One thing that I personally do is the credit unions around my area tend to offer shred days a couple times a year, so I just store my stuff and then take it to them. Monitor your accounts and your credit reports. And if you have questions, act quickly, start to investigate. Um, get familiar with multi-factor authentication or two-factor. Use a VPN. Make sure that you're using antivirus and anti-malware software. Create backups, use shredders, password managers, and passkeys, and that have I been pwned website. That's it, I think.
Thank you, Steve. If you are wanting to learn more about the financial aid process, we have a webinar in January 28th, that we are going to be partnering with the UIS Financial Aid Office on. We also have a post-webinar survey that you can fill out. Hopefully, I know that we ran over on time today, but it's very difficult to cover all the things to know about cybersecurity in an hour. And you can watch previous webinars from the Get Savvy series on YouTube. I want to thank all of the Get Savvy webinar series collaborators. We have many of them across the state and even some at the national level that help us with things. And if you have any questions, I did open up the question and answer tool if you want to ask questions anonymously, but we'll stick around for a few minutes if you do have any additional questions that you want us to address. But feel free to log off, go to your next thing, take a nap, get some food, whatever you need to do to stay warm in this very cold, frigid temperature. All right, I don't think I got any direct message questions, Steve, but did you get any direct message questions?
I was not checking the chat, but no.
So again, if you think of questions later that you want us to answer, you can always email the Student Money Management Center at studentmoney@uillinois.edu. It's the same email address that the login instructions came from. And we will make sure to make this recording available so you can share it with all your family and friends, hopefully in the next couple weeks before the winter break starts for the universities. So thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.